conservation. And joining us tonight is Dr. Michaela Gunther. She'll be introducing tonight's speaker. Dr. Gunther is a professor in the Department of Wildlife at Cal Poly Humboldt, whose research focuses on the behavioral ecology of mammals. And she has served on Sequoia Park Zoo's Conservation Advisory Committee since its inception in 2011. And she organizes this wonderful lecture series every year, and we're so thankful for her efforts and passion for conservation. And I will turn it over to Michaela now.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for coming this evening. We recognize it's the end of a long day. It's another Zoom meeting. So we're really grateful for the time you're willing to spend here with us. And as a member of the Sequoia Park Zoo Conservation Advisory Committee, and as a colleague of Dr. Ho Yi Wan's in the Department of Wildlife at Cal Poly Humboldt, I really am pleased to introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Ho Yi Wan is the newest faculty member in our department, and he's the director of the Spatial Ecology and Conservation Science Lab. He has established a strong international presence through his research, leading multiple projects across 4 continents. His research aims to understand the drivers of change on natural resources at multiple spatial and temporal scales. Some of his current projects include development of multi-scale wildlife habitat and connectivity models, climate change scenario models, and human-wildlife conflict models, some of which he'll be covering in tonight's presentation. Dr. Wan is also an advocate in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and his lab represents a microcosm of diversity and inclusion, has attracted students from an array of backgrounds, which we think brings innovation and creativity to our discipline of wildlife conservation. So let us feel connected when listening to tonight's talk by Dr. Ho Yi Wan, entitled "We Are All Connected: Understanding the Importance of Connectivity in Conservation and Management." Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Ho Yi.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Michaela, for the great introduction. Now is the part that I must not mess up. Let me share my screen. Let's see. And I need to swap the presenter view. So I think it's working now.
Looks great.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Yep, so tonight I'm going to be talking about connectivity, which is one of my favorite subjects when it comes to conservation. So when we talk about connectivity these days, one of the first things that people usually think about is internet or Wi-Fi connectivity, which is actually good because when I teach this in class, it actually helps teach about wildlife connectivity and ecological connectivity to students. As you all know, like connectivity is like really important in our life. Like we cannot live without it. Even our lecture tonight must require connectivity for us to have it, right? So it's so important. So I would tell my students, just like our internet or Wi-Fi connectivity, our wildlife animals, they also need their connectivity. Now, when we talk about the internet connectivity, like usually it comes through the wall and then through the cable to the modem, and then we can get into our devices, right? And so we're physically connected to our devices sometimes to get the connectivity. But just like Wi-Fi, right? Sometimes we can also get connectivity without the physical connection. So what is connectivity? It's kind of like an abstract idea that we sort of understand, but it's kind of abstract. So one definition that I kind of came up with, a simplified version of what connectivity is this. It is the degree to which something, like anything, like it can be matter, it can be organism, it can be internet, right? Are joined or flows between spaces. It's something that is joined or they flow between spaces. I don't know if anyone know what this game is on the slide on the right-hand side. So this is Go. So a ancient, like very ancient game, has a very long history that are oriented from Eastern Asia. So as you can see, like this game, like there are white pieces and black pieces, and the goal of this game, like very briefly, like of course there are lots of rules, is you want to connect your pieces of your color, right, either black or white, and you want to surround your opponent's pieces, right? So you want to disrupt their connectivity. Now this might be kind of hard if you don't know the rules of this game, but I'm sure the next one I show you, and most of you will understand and have experience with. So this is the Connect 4 game. Okay? So it's a very similar idea. Those who have played with this game, like the end goal is that we want to have 4 pieces that are aligned and connected. So 4 pieces that are aligned or connected either horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. Right? If you achieve that, then you win. And if you play this game, you know that you're not just trying to connect your pieces. So while you're trying to connect your pieces, at the same time, you have to try to disrupt your opponent, right? Try to disconnect them. So these are some of the games that we can try to understand what connectivity is, right? Not just from that definition, but we can try to help us conceptualize what connectivity is. Now, how does this relate to ecological connectivity or connectivity that wildlife animals also require? So these are some of the ecological connectivity that we often study. So there are lots of things that's related to connectivity in ecology. And we can modify slightly the definition that I provided before to fit it under the framework of ecology. So ecological connectivity is the degree to which a landscape facilitates or impedes ecological flows. Okay. And there are lots of different ecological flows that we can try to understand in nature. So for example, for organisms, a lot of us are interested in studying organisms, how they behave and what affects them. So for organisms, they move, right? But what actually moves? So it can be at a variety of levels. So from the molecular level, you can try to understand how genes move. So when species move, when they mate, they exchange genetic information. So the genes can actually move across the landscape, right? Which can lead to genetic diversity, which is a very important subject in conservation these days. For individuals also, they move. So there's a rather easier level to understand where you can see, right? Because we can actually visualize and we can see them on the landscape, see individuals moving, and we can measure the flow, right? How they move. And then we can measure from the level of metapopulations, right? How the population are moving on the landscape and form a network of populations. We call that metapopulation. And then we can also measure population. We can quantify population and then see how population might change over time. And then the whole species can also move, right? We call that range shift. So the whole range can actually move. So we can quantify those flows. Now, not just organisms, but a lot of other things also can flow. Lots of materials, for example, like air, right? Water, sediments, nutrients, and so forth. Like all these things, they can move and create flows. And we quantify them and see how connected they are. And there are other things, right? Energy, which is important. We study energy from the sun to the earth and how the plants can absorb the energy and leads to a lot of other things because they are consumed by other organisms, right? So we measure energy flow, and it can also be kinetic energy, right? Because water, for example, can store kinetic energy, and we can measure those flows and then see how connected those flows are. Information. So this very interesting area of study actually. So information can also flow. For example, the parents can pass on important information to their offspring that can help promote their fitness. Right? So the information can also flow, and then we can measure how connected they are. Like how are those information being transferred? How do species communicate? Right? And what might disrupt their communication? So there are lots of things that are related to ecological connectivity. And when we talk about connectivity, we can also classify them into structural connectivity versus functional connectivity. Now, structural connectivity is simple. It's very easy to quantify and measure compared to functional connectivity. For example, if you're measuring habitat, it is basically the physical connectedness of your habitat. So you can go out and you can measure them. And with satellite imagery, something that I do a lot, using remote sensing data, you can easily visualize the structural connectivity of any focal phenomenon that you're interested in, such as habitat. And in this figure, the bottom left, for example, from left to right, you have low connectivity, right? Two separate patches. And then the next one, you have some stepping stones in between them. So providing some connectivity through this stepping stone. And then slowly you have more and more connectivity, like you kind of see this bridge, but it's broken off in the middle. And finally, you have this like corridor or a bridge connecting two habitat patches. So structurally, you have low connectivity to high connectivity. But researchers are not just interested in studying structural connectivity. We're also interested in studying functional connectivity, which a lot of times are more important than just structural connectivity. So what is functional connectivity? It is an organism's response to the physical structure of the landscape, and then how that response facilitates or impedes its movement or ecological flow. Okay. So here, for example, like even though structurally, the figure at the bottom right, so even though structurally it's broken up, right, you have this stepping stone, but functionally it's still providing a pathway for species to move between the two bigger habitats. Right? So you can measure the functional connectivity by seeing whether they can actually move across. And vice versa, like even though sometimes you might have perfectly intact connectedness between two different locations, but depending on some other mechanism, the species might not be able to move across. For example, maybe the species require the right temperature in order to survive. And then if the area where it's connecting two locations is too hot or too dry, or for whatever reason, they might not be able to move across, right? Creating some barrier that's not caused by the structural connectedness, but caused by some other factors. And one thing to know is kind of like when we play the Connect 4 game. Something that's providing connectivity to one thing might actually be disrupting connectivity for another thing. So take a look at this picture. I want you to just take a look and think. So usually this, if we're more interactive, because I can't hear you right now. This is when I ask my student a question like, so what is providing connectivity here in this picture? Okay, so some of you might immediately notice, right? There's like this water here, right? That's providing maybe connectivity for some aquatic species, right? And then also there's this road here. Right? This road might be providing connectivity for humans. And humans carry a lot of things. Right? And there's also power line. Right? You see those power lines? So these power lines might be providing connectivity for electricity to flow. And then in the background, you have, of course, like this terrain where terrestrial species can move. Now, for the terrestrial species, then, they're blocked, their connectivity is cut off by this water here, right? So that's what I was talking about. So something that's providing connectivity for some organisms might be blocking or disrupting connectivity for other organisms. So when we talk about connectivity, we have to consider the context. So we need to think about what are the species that we're trying to understand, and what kind of flows are we trying to quantify, measure, what kind of function are we actually studying. So it's context dependent. So we cannot say, oh, this landscape has very high connectivity for the wildlife. You have to ask, like, for what wildlife, right? And for what function? What are we talking about here? It's context dependent. Why is ecological connectivity important? So I have a little video to show you here. So I hope the sound is working, and the audio level might be a little higher than my voice here. So you might want to lower the volume or make some adjustment. Okay, so I'm going to play. Hopefully it's going to work. So this to help you understand the importance of connectivity for wildlife.
Mass wildlife migrations is a natural phenomenon that occurs all around the world. In Africa, wildebeest undertake mass migrations as seasons change in search of food and water. These mass migrations are important for several reasons. For example, these animals are food for larger predatory mammals, such as lions. They're also hunted by humans and have been a source of food and clothing for millennia. Finally, these animals are important for tourism, as many people come to see animals in the wild. Unfortunately, wildlife populations are declining in many areas in Africa. One big problem is that protected areas, such as game reserves and national parks, are too small. Human settlements outside of these areas are expanding and blocking the migration pathways these animals use. In Kenya, the population has increased from 5.4 million people in 1948 to 47.6 million people in 2019, an increase of 780%. As the population has increased, so has the rate of habitat loss, as land is used for houses and farming, leading to the construction of fences and roads, which create barriers to migration. In the Masai Mara ecosystem in southwestern Kenya, the privatization of land has resulted in fences spreading like wildfire. Wildlife is frequently trapped inside fences, and many are killed while struggling to escape. Fences block wildlife migratory routes, accelerating the collapse of wildlife migration. Fences also exclude wildlife from their traditional habitats and watering points. In addition, uncontrolled sand harvesting on riverbeds makes it difficult for wildebeest herds to cross the rivers. Aside from the proliferation of fences, increasing settlements, agriculture, humans and livestock, and construction of roads have also contributed to the collapse of the Mara Luita wildebeest migration. The Mara Luita is the last ungulate mass migration in Kenya to collapse. A similar and more catastrophic collapse of wildlife migration occurred from 1999 to 2000 in the Athi-Kaputiei ecosystem, which includes the Nairobi National Park, also found in Kenya. However, this situation can be improved. Removing and controlling the spread of fences would help make migration routes accessible again, along with expanding or increasing wildlife conservancies. Roads, railways and oil and gas pipelines should be routed away from migratory pathways. Where this is not possible, wildlife migrations could be helped by building underpasses or overpasses, where roads and other barriers cross migration routes. To initiate these projects, sustainable incentives need to be given to the local people, which would replace the earnings lost from removing the fences. Moving forward, support from the national and county governments is essential to prioritise and accelerate the development and implementation of county spatial plans and ecosystem management plans. This support, in addition to that of local communities, will be essential in safeguarding migration routes and ensuring the future of wildlife populations in Kenya.
Okay, so yeah, I love the animations. It's really cool. I wish I am an animator, so I can just create a bunch of these videos. Then I don't have to personally teach a lecture. I can just show it to my students. But it's really cool, right? Like, as you can see, like connectivity is very important. In the animation that I just showed, the migration route, right? That is also a connectivity problem. They're building roads, fences, right? That block those migration routes, cut off the connectivity. And I'm going to show some more local example later on this, in our country. But so quick summary, why is ecological connectivity important? Right. So wildlife animal, they need the connectivity to gain access to important resources such as water, food, right? They also need to have access to find a mate, so they can produce offspring, right? And pass on those genetic information to future generations. And also need connectivity for migration, kind of like what we just talked about in the previous animation. And this is going to be more and more important because as climate is changing, a lot of the habitat is being altered. So are the species going to be able to adapt? Will largely dependent upon how well they can migrate to suitable habitat in the future. So connectivity is going to be more and more important. So at the university, something that I teach a student is how to quantify connectivity. Because this is so important, we actually need to quantify them, right? So that we can better plan ahead to see what we can do for the precious wildlife species. So if we're talking about structural connectivity, then it's actually a little easier, simple. There are some connectivity metrics that we can use to quantify structural connectivity. And there's a software called fragmentation that can easily help us using GIS layers to conduct this calculation. So there are two most commonly used connectivity metrics called patch cohesion index and connectedness index. And this is an example. So this is in Zimbabwe. On the left-hand side, you can see all those green dots, green patches. So those are the vegetated areas, which is most important for the wildlife animals. And for this study, Ho Yi Wan 2021, they tried to measure the structural connectivity of these vegetated areas. And you can see like this heat map is the patch cohesion index. So the warmer color represent higher connectivity of those vegetated areas. And the greener area represent lower patch cohesion, so lower connectivity. And they also found that the connectivity is related to the temperature, land surface temperature. So because if it's really hot, 48 degrees Celsius is really, really hot. So if it's hot, then it's related to other things, right? Usually less plants can survive there. And then if it's cooler, then usually more plants can survive there. So, so temperature is an important limiting factor of this structural connectivity of the vegetated areas. So with climate change, when things get hotter and hotter, the connectivity is going to reduce. And this structural connectivity that we're talking about. How about functional connectivity? So usually I will teach my student about functional connectivity by asking them to move from one end of the classroom to the other end of the classroom. Now, most of the students, when they do this, they're gonna move from, let's say, from this door to this door, right? They're gonna find the corridor and then they go to the other side like that, right? But like almost every semester, like there's going to be like that one or two students, they would do something crazy, right? They might like to jump on the table or whatever, or they go around and then get to the other side. So the point here is, depending on the individual or the species that you're studying, their behavior is going to be different, and the things that affect their connectivity is going to be different, right? Kind of similar to what we have been talking about. It's going to be context dependent. So these are some of the common ways to quantify functional connectivity. So I'm just listing them here. I'm not going to go too deeply into the methods because of time. This usually takes many lectures to cover each of these topics, right? To talk about the method. But I'm going to briefly talk about each of them. So we have graph theory, least cost, factorial least cost analysis, circuit theory, and resistant kernel. Okay, so these are the most common methods that ecologists use to quantify functional connectivity. So graph theory is the simplest model. So there are some dots, we call nodes, and then there are the lines connecting the dots, we call these edges. So the nodes can represent the core habitat, and then the lines between them can represent corridors, for example, right? And then we can create a graph that looks like this to depict the general area that's important for species. And it can be movement. It doesn't have to be movement, though. It can be other type of flows that's important for a species. So this is pretty cool and pretty easy and pretty simple. So this an example. So for example, here, if it is a forest species, when you see these forest patches, you can put some nodes there representing like some core forest habitat. And then you just connect them using some sort of threshold. You can try to depict and delineate these edges or these lines connecting the dots. Where areas that have no forest, then you don't connect them, right? So this is a pretty simple way to depict connectivity. The more lines and more dots represent more connectivity or higher connectivity. Right? So the advantage of this is simple, it's easy, but the disadvantage is also is simple and it's too easy, right? It doesn't tell you a whole lot. So other people have developed methods that can help us understand more sophisticated connectivity patterns. So for example, least cost analysis. So what is least cost analysis? So for example, same landscape, we can rasterize the landscape and pixelate it basically. And for each pixel, we can give it a value representing something we call resistance. So resistance is something that's blocking the movement or blocking the connectivity. So if it has a low resistance, then the species or the flow can move through them easily. But if it has a high resistance, for example, the roads here, then things cannot move across them so easily. Right? Pretty intuitive. And then when you have this on a map, right, you have all the values, then you can connect the two locations of interest with the least resistance. Okay, so for example, this path here represents the least cost or least resistance. But a lot of times species, they don't just use a single route or single path, right? So people have developed factorial least cost analysis connecting multiple paths of least cost. So kind of like a network of least cost paths. So to help us better understand, right, the entire network of connectivity instead of just one path. However, this is still for a lot of species, it might not be biologically meaningful because some species, they're more mobile, they don't rely on paths, so they can move anywhere. Like for example, bird, right? They can move across broad spaces. So then there are other methods developed. So one of them is called circuit theory, or circuitscape is a software that you can use to create a current map. So kind of like the same idea of resistance, but you flip it. It's a conductance surface. You try to see where movement is most likely to occur as a probability, looking at all the paths across the landscape. So this is kind of like a heat map. We call this a current map. So higher current represents higher conductivity, and it stems from electrical engineering, right? Stems from circuit theory in electrical engineering. But this is still assuming that species have an origin, and then they have a predestination that they're trying to move to. But sometimes species move randomly. They don't really have a destination. So there's another method called resistant kernel analysis. So this is just to consider what's the dispersal ability of a species, and also consider the density of the species population. And this is just a single individual on the landscape, for example, on panel A here on the left-hand side. So this is the dispersal ability of the species. It has a boundary, right? How far they can disperse. And then the color represents how likely they're going to be moving in those areas. Because even though they can travel that far, but doesn't mean that they will travel that far, right? And when you combine a lot of kernels, right, this is a single kernel, you combine a lot of kernels representing the entire population estimate of the area, you get a map that looks like this on the right, which we call cumulative resistant kernel surface. Really cool heat map showing the conductivity. Right? The warmer color represent higher conductivity, and the cooler color represent low conductivity or barrier in this case. So you can see there's a physical barrier that disrupt the conductivity. So what are the applications? What are some applications? So I want to show you the New Mexico wildlife habitat linkage assessment that I did. So there are actually a lot of species that I and my collaborators study, and I'm just going to be showing you like 5 of them here. We have the elk, the pronghorn, bighorn sheep, black bear, and lesser prairie chicken. So for example, the New Mexico Game and Fish they're interested in studying the conductivity of all these species. And they have some population estimates, right? So these are what they call the GMU or Game Management Unit. So it looks like very blocky. So they have some population estimates. They want to know like, what is the conductivity across the state of New Mexico here for the elk, for example, here. So I converted those population estimates into density surveys, and ultimately I want to get a more natural looking distribution of the elk here, right? So from A to D, you can see like from a very blocky to D, right? You have the points scattered across the state, some area with higher density, some area with lower density. And with the density estimates, we can combine it with what we call the landscape resistance surface. So a landscape resistance surface is similar to what I talk about when we talk about the least cost path analysis. So there are areas with high resistance, as shown here with darker color, right? So the roads, for example, the city or the desert, right? So those are areas with high resistance because the species is unlikely to move across those areas, or they present challenges for the species to move across. And then lighter color here is low resistance, and they're more likely to move across those areas. So then I can conduct conductivity analysis to look at the corridors, to look at the local area that they're using for movement, right? So there are lots of different conductivity maps I can create and calculate based on the resistance surface and where they're at. Then I also can prioritize those areas to see like which area deserve more conservation attention or management efforts. So here I'm ranking them by the connectivity strength of the key habitat area and then the corridors. And that is what the game and fish people want, right? They want to see where the connectivity is highest. But for conservation scientists, sometimes we also want to look at where connectivity is lower so that we rank those higher actually. So it's kind of like a reverse ranking because you might want to promote connectivity in those areas. Right? So how you rank them vary. It depends on your management objective, depends on the research question. But these connectivity maps are useful. And the resistance surface is going to be different for each species because they have different movement patterns, different dispersal ability, different preferences, different behavior. So the resistance surface are going to be different. And as a result, right, the corridors are going to be different. Their key habitat is going to be different. And the prioritization is going to look different. They're all going to look different. And those results along with results for other species are included in the Wildlife Corridors Action Plan. We have a draft right now. Currently, it is we have the public commenting period right now. So this is out for people to read and to comment on it. And this is part of the Wildlife Corridors Act signed by the governor in New Mexico back in 2019. And it is one of the first, well, I think it's the first Corridors Act across the country. And it directs the Department of Transportation and Department of Game and Fish there to develop this Wildlife Corridors Action Plan. And a lot of the results that I produce are included in this plan. For example, so I was showing you the connectivity of the different species, and we also overlay the major roads on top of it. So this is the predicted connectivity of 6 focal species of concern, and with the intersection of the connectivity areas with major roads in New Mexico. And then we can see like which section of the roads might be providing more connectivity, and that's, you know, it might also have greater collision risk, and also can identify areas for us to promote connectivity, to facilitate movement, for example, across highways. And this is a map for all 6 species. And so I rank them, right? So we rank these highways by different section to show like which section is providing the highest connectivity for different species. So the different color represent different species here. And these are the top priority section of the highway that require attention. And so after knowing that, what can we do? Right. So some of the things that have already been done there is, you know, they're building this mid bridges to facilitate movement. In this case, we know that this location have lots of mule deers. We also put camera there to try to see if if it's working or not. Right? So this is one thing that we can do. We also put fence to kind of funnel the species toward this crossing here. We also have this box culvert to facilitate movement. So for this kind of infrastructure, we have evidence showing that the bears and bobcats are using them, which is pretty interesting. And also, for example, for this location, we identify it as high connectivity for the mule deer, and there was a gate that was set by the landowner there. And so we told the landowner, well, this is an area of high conductivity for mule deer. Like, could you remove it? And the landowner did. Now it's providing conductivity for mule deer. And this is also really cool. So on the right, we have the old type of culvert. It's kind of like a mini tunnel here, but it's kind of small. And we know that this location like has a lot of, is potentially important for animals like mule deer and elk. And they don't really move across this like small culvert. Well, at least not in a big herd, right? So we expanded it and built this box culvert to facilitate greater movement and connectivity. So those are some examples of how we can use it. And not only it can help us to protect and conserve connectivity for wildlife, it actually also helps humans. It safeguards human lives and property because we can identify where are the locations with high conductivity, then that also lead to higher collision probability, right? Vehicle collision probability. So in those areas, like is part of our recommendation in the Wildlife Corridors Action Plan. We suggest these signs or message board be set up in those locations to reduce vehicle collision. So there are lots of cool thing that we can do. Because of time, there are actually a lot of other applications that's related to connectivity. So I'm just going to briefly show you some of these applications, not going to discuss too deeply. Another thing that we can use that I've done in the past is to look at urban green space. So in a lot of cities, like urban green space is becoming more and more important. We know that this is important, not only for wildlife animals, but also for human. It actually can promote human health, have a lot of health benefits to human if we have more green space in urban area. So this study was conducted in China, in Luohe, China. So the research question was to see whether there's enough green spaces to provide ecological connectivity in this city, and where are the locations where we might need to build more, maintain or establish more green spaces. So using similar methods I talked about, right? This is the connectivity map. The warmer color represents greater connectivity of those green spaces. And the blue location, for example, like this area, let me see if I can use annotate too, like this location, this location. So these are agricultural area. So those are the areas that is blocking most of the connectivity. So this is the kind of like the summary of this study. And of course, there's also recommendation on how we can promote more connectivity. For example, our recommendation is to try to promote the connectivity between these two locations here. You see this gap here. So if we can build kind of like a triangle, like a triangle of connectivity, then that will be very good. And then finally, genetic connectivity is also important. I briefly mentioned in conservation, this is becoming more and more important. How can we promote genetic diversity? And one of the things that we can do is to promote genetic connectivity, because if you have more genetic connectivity, there's more gene flow that will lead to greater genetic diversity. And this study we conducted in Europe, in the Mediterranean Sea, to look at this endangered coral species. So I'm not going to go into too much detail, but like this pie chart represents the different genotype. You can think of it as different types of population, or they contain different genes. Okay, we want to see like whether those genes can flow freely among all these different coral colonies. And this is the connectivity map. The green line shows that there's a very low resistance, and then the red lines show that there's a higher resistance of their genetic exchange. So the genetic material is not going to be so easily move across those areas. And these species, they only, because they're coral, so they don't actually move. So we're trying to see whether the offspring, you know, when they're in larvae stage, you know, how they move. So they usually move along the shore. So finally, this is the concluding slide. I picked this picture because first of all, it's adorable. It's really cute. Two authors here holding hands, and the holding hands represent connectedness, right? Connectivity. So, and the take-home message of my talk tonight, first is hopefully you understand the connectivity is important to wildlife. Okay, it's very important. And then the next thing is we can help conserve connectivity. There are lots of things that humans can do to help conserve connectivity. And if we continue to work on this, you know, study connectivity for species and try to identify solution to help conserve and promote them, a lot of species, including the listed endangered threatened species, can actually be saved. And thank you very much. That is my talk for tonight. If you want to ask me more questions, these are my contact information, my email. If you want to see the papers I've done, like those publications, you can find them on my website here. And then I also have a Twitter account. I don't really use it that much, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Dr. Wan. We are eager to jump in with questions, and I'll share questions from our Zoom chat and from the Facebook Live comments, and we'll keep checking to see if new questions are submitted. So feel free to send them in now. And as a reminder too, our lecture series is possible thanks to the sponsorship of Papa and Barkley, and our other conservations would not be possible without your help. So we will paste the link to donate to the Conservation Fund again in the chat too. I just want to start by saying I'm so excited and blown away by the Wildlife Corridor Act that you were participating in getting made possible in New Mexico. So congratulations, that's an amazing accomplishment. And I'm really curious how you're going to use those skills here in Humboldt now that we've secured you over here at at Cal Poly Humboldt. How are you going to do research locally now on connectivity?
Yeah, so I would love to do more research locally in Humboldt or in California that's related to connectivity. And I have been in touch with different agencies, you know, I have talked with them, but we're always limited by funding, of course, right? So we also need to hopefully come up with some funding to do research, kind of like what I did in New Mexico. But yeah, I've talked with different agency folks, and they're all very interested, and they show support. But the limiting factor here is funding. So if we have funding, then we can get students to learn all those techniques that I was showing, and then they can do marvelous, fantastic work. And I think that will help improve the connectivity for wildlife here in Humboldt and maybe California. Yeah.
Wonderful. We have a question asking if you can elaborate a bit on what we can do to help with conservation of connectivity, maybe just on our own properties. Are there ways that people can, just as regular citizens, can get involved? I know that you mentioned just even removing that gate was really helpful for passage of the mule deer. So what are some things our listeners might be able to do?
Yeah. So I think for me personally, like my property is not going to help much because I a very small house. But I know there might be some landowners who have lots of land. So that might be something to look at if you're a private landowner that own lots of land. Like, so there are lots of things that can affect connectivity, not just fences, not just gate. Right? It can also be power line. It can be just cutting down trees sometimes, and the way that you cut down trees also matters. It can be agricultural. So a lot of things. So really depends on the type of land that you have, the spatial configuration of the landscape, and what species might be of concern in that area. One species, for example, that I studied for many years is a spotted owl. So which is a very, very interesting species to study because a lot of them live in forests, like oak grove forest. If we don't do anything with the forest now, like a lot of them are really dense, which is prone to fire, for example. So if the fire burns through them, that actually might affect their connectivity. If it's like mega fire, like across like really large space, right? They can disrupt the ability for them to fly to other location and affect their dispersal patterns. So something that I know lots of land management agencies are trying to do is to thin the forest. But then thinning the forest is also tricky because when you cut down trees, it reduces fire risk, but at the same time, it might actually reduce habitat quality for species that's using those trees and forests. So how to maintain the balance? So that's my expertise actually. So I've done a lot of studies to model, right, how the different treatment scenarios might affect both fire risk and also the connectivity and habitat quality to try to achieve a balance there. So that is a part that's a little tricky, but yeah, there are methods to try to help us answer those questions. So two of my students, by the way, are kind of studying that question right now, studying the spotted owl, and we're also going to project it forward to see how climate change might play a role. So it's highly complex. The things that I was showing is, of course, a simplified version of a lot of things, but in reality, it's like connectivity is very, very complex. But we do have the tools and methods to better understand them.
I think that those examples you showed of those 6 species illustrated that very well, how complicated and specialized it is for each species that we're trying to think about.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, so that was a really great illustration. Another question is, was it difficult to put in the wildlife corridors in New Mexico, or were there plenty of established underpasses and it was just a matter of directing the animals to those underpasses?
Yeah, so there are a lot of underpasses, and not just underpasses, right? Like overpasses, all sort of things that we've already tried to do in the past, even before the wildlife corridor action plan was drafted. So part of the recommendation is also to verify the effectiveness of those underpasses, overpasses, right? Those wildlife crossing. So the models that I built help answer that. Like, is it effective? Are those locations ideal? Should we maybe use some of the resources to maintain those crossing to other locations, right? Or the ones that are really effective, should we expand them? So those are the type of questions that managers are most concerned about. And we work together to see how our models can better inform those decisions.
And we have a question about what types of people do research on connectivity.
So I might be biased, but I would say like people who really love the environment and wildlife. So we're the people that want to do connectivity. So that is a must. If you're in this business, you must love wildlife. I think kind of like everyone here. If you're in this talk, you must love wildlife. Then secondly, people with really good quantitative skills, I would say, because a lot of these models are quite complex, requires lots of skills, interdisciplinary skills, actually. So you need to know about wildlife, you need to know about statistics, you need to know about spatial ecology, you need to know about GIS, remote sensing, computer simulation. Yeah, so quantitatively, they kind of need to be up there in order to do this analysis.
And it sounds like your lab is focusing on that type of research, and so that might be a good resource. I assume you have on your website some information about your lab and how people might apply to work in that lab too.
Oh, yeah. So, of course, if you're a student or if you have a desire to maybe get like a graduate degree or something, talk to me, definitely talk to me.
We have some Facebook comments saying, awesome lecture, thank you. We had the lecture last month talked, it was a completely different topic, but one of the examples was about connectivity and reestablishing a new migratory path for elephants that to evade a zone where there was heavy poaching. So they were disrupting the traditional migration route using some of these techniques you were talking about, different barriers, to redirect the elephants, and it reduced the poaching to zero just by this new migration route they were able to develop. So it's a cool connection from our last talk to your talk when you were sharing that video. It made me think of that lecture by Ken Ramirez as well. But yeah, connectivity is critical to conservation planning and thinking about how we can serve wildlife.
Yeah, definitely. And there's some, I received some direct messages from people. Should I try to address them or?
Sure. Yeah, if there's anything we haven't covered yet, go for it.
Yeah, so I have a question about, are you studying connectivity in any species native? Oh, okay, I think I kind of answered that question. Just curious, when certain corridors get built, such as box culverts, what agencies are responsible for maintaining them and making sure they stay clear for wildlife? So I guess it varies by the state, but for example, in New Mexico, it was the Department of Transportation and Department of Game and Fish. It also depends on where those are located, like the land ownership might also matter, right? Because sometimes they're also covered in, let's say, like BLM land or US Forest Service land, right? Then, of course, I think those will be maintained by whichever agencies have the jurisdiction. Hope that have answered your question.
Like you said, very interdisciplinary work. So it's also very interagency work.
Yeah.
We also have another question from Facebook that was, I loved seeing the work in New Mexico and the example from China. I recall learning about the design of reserves in Costa Rica in the early 2000s about creating corridors that go from the sea to the mountains. How common are these setups today? And then she kind of had a follow-up question of how did the New Mexico law come to be?
Yeah, so two parts of the question. So corridors, yes. In fact, we are doing those in California. I know there are corridors built for example, the cougars in Southern California. So it's definitely growing, I would say, in a lot of places. People recognize that it's not just maintaining habitat, but the linkage between the habitat is also important. So more and more places are doing that, creating corridors. And one thing further is assisted migration and augmented gene flow, which is also related to connectivity. So not just connecting what habitat we have right now, but also anticipating the future, trying to see what climate change might influence our landscape. Then you start building those corridors to connect to ideal locations that species can migrate into in the future. So that's an area that's kind of conservation biologists are focusing on, and augmented gene flow, which is a little bit more controversial, depending on, I guess, your location. People might or might not support it because some people might think that, oh, you're messing around with evolution or something. But to me, I feel like it's totally warranted to start thinking about augmented gene flow, which just means, what kind of genotypes might be more or well adapted to future climate, and you start to plan ahead and preserve those genetic diversity and move them to location where they can facilitate reproduction so that those traits can pass on to future generation. So that is also kind of newer area that is still a little controversial now, but I personally, I feel like, yeah, we kind of have to do that, given that climate change has such a huge influence. And I forgot the second part of the question. Could you
No, that's fine. Yeah.
remind me?
Yeah, I should have waited to ask it, but how did the New Mexico law come to be? The wildlife.
I don't know, like maybe a miracle, maybe like conservation scientists and wildlife lovers prayed very hard or something. Well, actually, there are lots of petitions before that happened. So they talk with the legislatures, and they talk with policymakers, showing them the science behind it, right? Showing them the importance of maintaining connectivity. And if you happen to have legislatures and policymakers who are who back science and who believe in data-driven policy, right? Then something good might happen. I know in some states it might be more difficult.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be a problem here though.
Certainly we have the precedent of that, like you mentioned, that large corridor that is being built, the Santa Monica Mountain area. So that's a good precedent that hopefully we can work on this more as well. We have some more comments as well. Extremely appreciated the lecture. Thank you. And Gretchen Ziegler asks, seems like Caltrans loves to erect more and more barriers for driver safety along the 101. But what is your opinion about these new barriers if you have one for wildlife? And how do you think citizens can influence this?
Yeah, so that, it's always hard, right? These are human dimension, right? Sometimes you have human wildlife conflicts. Yeah, whenever it has to deal with like social aspect of things and human lives, right? Human properties, then it makes it very difficult to balance the need between animals versus human. So we definitely cannot neglect the importance of protecting our safety. I think that is very important. That said, I also feel like there is common ground for us to maintain both. And that's part of the reason why we're doing these models for New Mexico, right? We're trying to identify areas with really high risk of vehicle collision, so that the approach that you do, like, for example, the type of barriers that you build and the type of underpasses or overpasses, the location of them, you can have better information to know how to do them with these models that I showed you, right? So even with 101, I think there's opportunities to better study where my collision occur more often, most frequently, and then what type of animals might be killed by those collision, right? So then we can come up with a game plan to see, oh, so maybe we can divert the animal to move over there, right? I showed you briefly, right? We built fences to kind of like funnel the animals to a certain area. One of my graduate students, like, she's not doing this directly, but she's also trying to understand connectivity, like Ashley. So she's trying to study elk movement, and she's going to build some connectivity model. And one of the goals is to try to help us understand the movement of the elk and whether there are locations that are more likely to have elk crossing the road, and then if so, like, can we move them somewhere else? Yeah. So there's something going on right now, but for me, I'm more interested in a broader scale. So not just like one species, right? But more species. So kind of like what I did for New Mexico, right? More species and cover a greater spatial extent. So those are the type of questions we should start thinking about. So not just like one location or one highway.
Well, thanks so much. I think that we've run out of time, but I think we've answered all the questions. I hope I didn't miss any, but it sounds like maybe you might have gotten a couple messages as well. But yes, thanks.
Yeah. There's a good comment before we end. This from Kimberly, like just for your information. Oh, today. So Assembly Member Laura Friedman introduced a bill today that would prioritize crossings and other infrastructure projects to improve wildlife connectivity and make California roads safer. The bill is AB 2344. Well, hopefully it will pass. If it passes, then that would be great.
Well, we'll have to look more into that. Maybe we can share some more info about that on our social media as well once we can read more about it. That sounds great.
Yeah.
All
Thank you,
right.
Kimberly.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And thank you again for joining us tonight, Dr. Wan, and sharing all about habitat connectivity and how important this is for wildlife conservation to be successful.